disaster on a remote Sierra peak.
I saw it coming and I kind of froze.
A loose boulder crushes a hiker's leg and sends him sliding out of control.
There was a streak of red blood passing me on the right-hand side.
The next decision he makes is a life changer.
I knew if I tourniqueted the leg, I was probably going to have to cut the leg off.
Alone in the wilderness, on a barren mountainside with no one looking for him, the struggle to stay alive will take everything this hiker knows about survival. In the wild, when things go bad, they go bad fast. Without warning, your life can hang by a thread. Adventurer and survivor Craig DiMartino fought back from his own wilderness disaster to reclaim his life. Now Craig meets other courageous outdoorsmen who beat the odds and return from their own fight to survive.
Hi, I'm Craig DiMartino. Here's a question. If you were badly injured, would you have the knowledge and the guts to work through the pain and do whatever it takes to save your own life? Greg Hein answered that question for himself the hard way. Climbing to the summit of Mount Goddard in the Sierras was the easy part. But when a boulder came crashing down and crushed his leg, surviving for the next 6 days would challenge his emotional and physical resources to the very limits of what one man can endure.
Greg Hein grew up loving the great outdoors, and especially hiking in it.
He would often go fishing with my mom and dad. Greg would always find time to head off by himself on a nature walk.
And I love getting lost in the mountains too. I actually physically tried to get lost in the Sierras as much as I could. I just hike off and I usually would come back a little bit later than the time I was given, but I always found myself coming back.
Greg became a whitewater rafting guide, learned everything he could about trees and plants, and eventually majored in environmental sciences in college. Finally free from coursework, the only thing Greg wanted to do was go on a hike in the Sierras.
I really hadn't been doing a lot of hiking because I was either working or back at school. So the hike 4th of July weekend was definitely a way to decompress and get in touch with the mountains again.
Greg's plan was to leave on Thursday, return home on Monday.
Hey Greg, where are you off to?
I'm going up to Kings Canyon for the weekend, up on Goddard.
Didn't outline the trip very well, which was common with Greg.
That sounds like fun. When do you think you're going to be back?
Monday.
Basically, all we ever got to hear was, I'm headed to X, and I'll be home sometime.
He might have been an expert outdoorsman and hiker, but packing for a hike was not Greg's strong suit.
As typical, his manner of exit was chaos. He's running through the family room. Dad, do you know where my stove is? And I rolled my eyes and I thought, well, how in the world would I know where your stove is? I don't know where any of your gear is.
Greg's destination was Kings Canyon National Park, east of Fresno, California. There he intended to climb Mount Goddard. From its summit, with an elevation of over 13,000 feet, there are views of virtually every major peak in the high Sierras.
Kings Canyon is a very diverse area, lots of different topography there, over 14,000 feet in the higher portions of the Sierra Crest.
Considered the baby brother of Yosemite, there are hundreds of thousands of wilderness acres in Kings Canyon.
Many places within Kings Canyon National Park are very remote and also very isolated. Very few people actually make the summit of Mount Goddard in any given year.
On his trek, Greg could stop at Blaney Hot Springs, camp out at Martha Lake, summit Goddard, and then check out Wanda Lake on the return before taking one last dip in the hot springs.
I've been solo hiking since I was 18. I've done 200+ mile trails, and I find that the main reason why I solo hike is just because I can't find anybody to go with me on the days that I have free or that want to do the miles that I want to do.
Greg got to the park late Thursday. He took his GPS and a camera, but left his guidebook and cell phone behind.
Mileage-wise, I knew that I had 4 days to play with and that I could do that hike and, you know, a new place that I hadn't been in.
He set out from Florence Lake Trailhead and hiked around 12 miles in.
So this is your first time back in Kings Canyon.
It had been nearly a year since Greg had seen Mount Goddard and Kings Canyon National Park when he went back with Craig.
Is that kind of weird, just to even be hiking again?
No, it feels good. It's always fun to be in the mountains, so.
Yeah, Goddard is out over us, right?
Yeah, it's off to the left. It's the Black Rock, highest point.
Is it good to see it again, or is it weird to see it again?
Feels good to be back. When you're out, there's a chemical change that I think goes through everybody, that goes through my body. I'm out for a day, and it's almost a reset. If things are bothering me, I can get some clarity, and it's just, it's helpful in that regard to find perspective in life, and the mountains are an easier place to do that because you don't have the distractions.
He camped out in a meadow by Blaney Hot Springs.
I have a huge respect for the dangers implicit in any outdoor pursuit. And when I go to the mountains and go hiking, I try to make sure that I place the route that I'm going to do in such a way that it's a way that I can do it and not have any consequences.
So far, Greg's hike was going according to his plan.
Well, we had this discussion about him solo hiking a lot, and he knew very vividly, very clearly that we did not like it, did not approve of it, wished he wouldn't do it. But my son has a favorite saying. It's always, "Dad, don't worry about it, things will work out." I've heard that way too many times.
But on this hike, things did not work out. Greg Hein was finally on the trail of a long overdue hike in the Sierras. His plan was to summit Mount Goddard in Kings Canyon National Park over the 4th of July weekend.
So on Friday, I got up, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and excited to be doing the loop.
Greg never found his stove before he left home, so his only provisions were some hard dehydrated food packets and water. After a couple hours of hiking, he came to a trail juncture.
And I took a right and went south up the South Fork of the San Joaquin.
Hey. Hi. How you doing? I'm good. How are you? Oh, you know.
And ended up chatting at that juncture with somebody who was hiking the JMT. And we chatted probably for 15, 20 minutes.
I haven't passed one person yet. You're the first.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And this was at the height of the summer and a holiday weekend.
It's going to be a lot more solitude for you, I think.
I love it.
Well, have a good hike. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, hopefully the trail is crossing. All right. Have a good one.
And then that was the last person I saw.
The area Greg was hiking was truly isolated, and also a place of unforeseen dangers.
Some of the hazards of traveling through Kings Canyon include changes of weather, can happen very abruptly and without warning. Elevation. Much of that area is very near or above 8,000 feet in elevation, where a lot of people start having high-altitude pulmonary edema or high-altitude cerebral edema, which can be very life-threatening and are not uncommon inside of the park.
By the end of the day, Greg reached Lake Martha. He had also climbed to an elevation of around 11,000 feet, but so far, the altitude didn't have any effect on him. Greg's plan for Saturday was pretty straightforward. He walked around Lake Martha, heading towards Mount Goddard. As he hiked along, the terrain noticeably changed. This was ancient glacier country, and he was now in a boulder field.
Right before reaching the top of Mount Goddard, I had a snack, mainly to kind of slow myself down so that I didn't have any altitude problems. A couple years ago, I had gotten a little altitude sickness, so I kind of just wanted to check in with myself, get some water, eat some food, and I was feeling great.
While he snacked, Greg took out a map and studied it. His concern was how he would come back down the mountain from the top.
I didn't know the ridge, and I didn't know what was there and what difficulties were really present. I just knew the north side of the Goddard Ridge had a pretty decent drop, and the south side was a little bit easier to walk.
He decided to make his final decision at the summit, and he couldn't wait to get there. In his rush to pack up, he didn't realize he left his map behind. Even if Greg no longer considered himself a peak bagger, he really enjoyed the view from this one when he got there.
Reaching the top of Mount Goddard was fun. I mean, it's great views. You see the haze of, the Central Valley, and you see all the other peaks. So I just started stitching together pictures for my buddy mainly, and just soaking it in.
When he went to sign the summit register, he was slightly taken aback.
I looked at the trail register, and there had only been 3 or 4 people who had signed it that year. That kind of was maybe my first indication that I was in a fairly remote part of the park, and I thought Mount Goddard was a much more heavily traveled peak, and my mind was shifting to how do I get off? That was still troubling me a little bit as which way I wanted to go.
A steep gully filled with boulders stretched out in front of him.
I didn't want to side hill through a fairly large boulder field for a few miles, so I just was looking for the least technical route down the North Ridge.
When Greg got off the ridgeline, he came to a scree, a slope covered with loose stones.
Every step when I started the initial descent was ankle-deep dirt and rocks, and so every couple steps I would stop, let the boulders flush out from underneath me, and see if there were any rocks that were let loose above me.
When he got to the bottom of the slope, there was a snowfield. Greg thought he could slide down it and self-arrest, stop himself if he needed to.
The fear of the uncontrollable slide was in my head, so I was just kind of more or less trying to gather myself and to talk myself into being comfortable with the situation.
He collected himself and started working his way down.
I was making the move, and I had a small rock that pulled out in my hand that I couldn't put back, so I just threw it down the mountain. To this day, I still can't figure out where the rock came from. It was a rock let loose, and I saw it coming, and I kind of froze, and it didn't have enough speed to just fly off the ledge. It dropped straight down.
Thrown off his feet by the boulder, Greg started sliding down the mountain on his backpack.
Looked down, I realized there was a streak of red blood passing me on the right-hand side. I was like, okay, now I have a serious situation that's going to change the whole scope of this hike.
Three days into his solo hike, Greg Hein was knocked off his feet by a boulder when making his descent down Mount Goddard.
I noticed a limp foot dangling in front of me, bleeding fairly profusely, enough to scare me that I might bleed out.
You weren't like on a flat spot, you're on a 45-degree snow slope, so you're sliding now. What were you thinking?
Okay, the hike's now changed to something. Maybe I can still hike. And then processing a little bit more, sliding down the snowfield some more, realizing there's no way I'm hiking, and it's now turned into a survival situation. And then I realized there was a roller field coming up, so I tried to self-arrest.
So when you finally self-arrest, you kind of know what to do in the backcountry?
Well, first off, I just knew I needed to get off the snow so I didn't soak up more moisture into my clothes.
He also knew he could become hypothermic lying in the cold. So he immediately put on some extra clothes.
The adrenaline was flowing and it prevented most of the pain from being something that was too tough to deal with. It was just kind of like, okay, breathe, relax. Like, you can't make the situation any better, but you can sure make it worse. So kind of repeating that a few times in my head was like, okay, make sure you have everything you need before you move. Like, be slow and methodical. Just kind of running those things through my head really gave me kind of the perspective of, okay, let's be calm and get through it.
Not only was Greg worried about bleeding out, he was fearful of losing consciousness. Next, Greg knew he had to splint his broken leg and stabilize his foot. Luckily, he had held onto one of his trekking poles during the slide. He cut off part of his thermarest pad and covered the open wound where the boulder had fractured his leg.
Was the trade-off like you're thinking, okay, I might lose the leg? Was that like a quick thing? Was that like a progression for you? And were you okay with, hey, I might lose my leg here?
If I can lose the leg but still survive the situation, that's a great trade. Like, I'll make that trade every day of the week.
Right.
And so that's what was occurring kind of immediately on Saturday right after the accident.
He came to a decision while splinting his leg. He needed to move to a more comfortable place to stay until he could figure out what he was capable of doing next. To do any kind of movement, he had to lighten his load. He decided to leave his sleeping bag and food and water behind. He crawled off the snowfield, carefully holding up his ankle, and slowly made his way to a more protected area with a view.
I knew immediately when the accident happened that you can go 3 days without water and 3 weeks without food. So I had these in the back of my head and didn't think that I was going to be out there for 3 weeks. I actually kind of thought that I'd be rescued within the first day or two.
It was a hiker's worst nightmare. After a loose boulder crashed into his leg and caused a potentially deadly compound fracture, Greg Hein was in survival mode. His immediate concern was the bleeding. He needed to stop it, but not to the point where it would risk killing his limb.
I would put enough pressure until my leg started to throb, and then when the leg started to throb, I would back it off. And so I do this on and off kind of pressure. Because I knew if I tourniqueted the leg, I was probably going to have to cut the leg off.
He successfully reduced the blood flow and settled in for a restless sleep.
I really was only concerned about the bleeding. So when I would wake up and it would hurt, I would see how much it was bleeding, and knowing that it wasn't bleeding as much was really quite a joy for me, because that meant that I wasn't losing the blood. And since I wasn't going to be eating anything for the foreseeable future, that wasn't going to be too fatigued with the loss of blood.
When Greg woke up Sunday morning, the reality of his situation became very clear. He wasn't even expected home till late Monday.
I think Sunday morning into midday was basically what I was grasping with and kind of just internalizing, was that there's 2 days to kill now. And that's, you know, like not move the leg, that's get as comfortable as possible. I was just present in knowing that this is my reality. This is all I have to deal with. This is all I can control. And I can't even control what's going on with my leg.
Greg's leg was shattered, and this compound fracture was now going from a very bad injury to a potentially lethal one. Greg had made a critical mistake the day before when he was splinting it. He had covered the open wound with a piece of his sleeping pad.
Thermarest prevented the air from interacting with my wound, and it kind of created a moist spot from when the rock hit me. It put dirt into the wound, and so the moisture and the dirt led to an infection within the first 24 hours of the accident.
Alone in one of the most remote areas of the park, Greg knew no one would be looking for him for at least 2 more days. Every passing hour sent him hurtling towards dire consequences. Greg knew that an open fracture was a medical emergency. If not treated immediately with antibiotics and often surgery, the damage to the tissue, muscles, and nerves could be permanent.
It was just make sure you don't do anything to minimize the chances for survival.
The loss of Greg's leg was a very real possibility. Even worse, if the infection spread throughout his body, it could kill him.
Severely injured with a life-threatening infection brewing in his leg, Greg is miles from help on one of the most desolate peaks in the Sierras. He knows his only hope to survive is himself, what he'll come to call his self-rescue. Join us for this incredible adventure on the next Fight to Survive.